Okie dokie. So I think we'll just get started now, if that's okay. So firstly, I just want to welcome everybody who's come along tonight. Thank you very much for coming along. Welcome back to those who have joined before. And for those of you who it's your first time, welcome even more. We do have a code of conduct. So basically the code of conduct just covers being respectful to each other. So as long as you do that, we'll all have a great time. There will be question and answer through the session. There'll be a couple of breaks for that. If you can add any questions you've got into the chat and put a queue beforehand, it makes it much easier for me to spot them. And we'll do some community shout outs at the end. And then we've got the wonderful Tony Ponton talking to us this evening. It's very early where he is today, so a little bit of sympathy for him there. He is the head of business advisory in Queensland and the principal consultant for Elaborate. So he's going to talk to us tonight about pivoting to remote big room planning. So Tony, if you could take it away.
Morning from my point of view, morning, and evening from your points of view, I would imagine. Cool. All right, let's see if I can share my screen. We'll start. Yay, just let me know if you can see.
All good. Yeah.
Excellent. All right. So I've been doing this agile thing since about 2002. So big room planning and stuff like that was around before even the word safe was invented, right? So been doing the big room planning thing, working with our organizations, and my particular organization's been doing a lot around distributed stuff. So my background, I came from a big financial services company, and we did a lot of distributed work. So some of the stuff I'm going to talk about here today is not rocket science. We've all probably run across it before. It's just giving you some idea about how we did it, why we did it, what happened, and you know, it was expedited by probably everybody knows the COVID thing. So hopefully that adds a bit of background. All right, so I like to tell a bit of a story, but the story is about mid-March. I don't know how the coronavirus hit your area, but obviously it was just starting to make its presence known in Australia. So we're a little bit more secluded, obviously, because we're an island nation. And for us, we could see it happening overseas, but literally nobody was thinking too much about it. We're just doing our thing, right? And we're working with our teams, and we never imagined that it was actually going to kick off, if you like. So there was a team of our consultants, myself and two other principals working with a rather big gas transportation company. And we were in the home stretch of bringing them into their inaugural big room planning at their client site. So as a major client site, you know, we're talking a fairly good organization, big couple of hundred odd people. And we put in a fair bit of work, as you would imagine. All of a sudden, COVID hits, and within 2 days, the international borders are shut. Everybody's talking about social distancing. What's that? Right. And we were all told, well, we're going to have to shut the shop down. You're all going to go home. And so one of the big conversations was, you know, the company was really relying on this big room planning. We'd got the agile teams up and running. We just got them talking. We got them collaborating. We're ready to planning. We'd managed to move them away from traditional. And so what do we do now? So thinking about that, it was very clear it was going to be very hard. So we had multi-team, it's a very high profile event. We had interstate, so interstate for us is, you know, we have New South Wales, Queensland, etc. As Scott said before, you know, our state's pretty big, it's almost huge. We even had international, so we had Kuala Lumpur bundled in just to give us another time zone to have fun with, right? So we didn't want to make it easy. And none of these people were going to be able to be physically available in the big room. We'd even organised to bring some of the Kuala Lumpur people over so that we actually had their presence. So it was a big investment for the company. So when we think about that, that's a fairly big thing. And so we really had 7 days left before we'd schedule it to happen. We now had to pivot it to 100% online. So you can imagine 3 consultants with that on their head was rather, okay, deer in the spotlight, and all of the C spaces and everybody were looking at us going, okay, what are we going to do? And we went, we've got this. Then we went into a room, went, have we? So we had to think our way through what we were going to do. So the challenge for us, we put on the wall. Okay, so how can we have that collaborative space and build out a program wall? Because let's face it, what we want to do here is we're not just doing, and I think a lot of people lose that. And I don't want to preach to anyone on here, but I talk about this a lot to everybody. Is this really, a lot of people focus on the mechanistic practices of agile, safe, whatever it is, but they don't think about the humanistic thing. And the humanistic thing that we're trying to create is those collaborative connective tissues, right? And I'll talk about that a little bit. But that's literally getting the organization to start thinking about how it's working horizontally and vertically and connecting their work, right? So how can we do that in a remote sense and create something that's going to continue on? Because it's becoming very obvious to us about this time while we're planning this, that this is not going to be a short stint. We thought a couple of weeks, maybe. But then we realised as the press started to hit and the cases started to hit, and unfortunately we had some loss of life, that we realised this thing was bigger than what we actually did. And just to give you background on that, I live with a frontline worker, and she was telling me this is big. So the other thing for us was, how do we replicate that whole concept of breakout room remotely, right? We can't just do it in one thing. And for us, we didn't have access to Zoom. It's a corporate organization. They wouldn't touch Zoom because of its obviously, well-publicized security stuff. They had a corporate solution, which, you take a very good product, which was Skype, give it to Microsoft, and you end up with what we have now. So they had Skype for Business. So you can imagine the challenges that we had with that. And then if you think about that in the next stuff, how do you ensure everyone understands the process? It's bad enough when you're doing this for the first time with a bunch of participants who've never done it before, right? And then you move into this sort of environment and you go, okay, well, how are we going to do this? It's an interesting thing for them. So that was a big challenge for us. The other one we really had to think about is, how do we do this without overloading the corporate assets? You're going to have a bunch of people coming in and we're going to try and work with them. We have to work out a solution that's not going to blow everything up. And I think, when people jump into, and I've been doing remote a long time, like I've worked with distributed teams. The company, the last gig I did before I left and moved to this company, we had 30 teams and 600 people across 3 different countries. And if anybody knows anything about using some of these assets, there's nothing better than the fact that somebody's mouth is moving and the words aren't coming out, right? Or there's lag time or all that. So we wanted to avoid that if we possibly could. The other big thing for us, as we talked about, again, linking back to that collaborative connective tissue and getting people to start thinking and talking together, is we wanted to create an asset that was reusable, because we could see this was going to kick off for a long time. And we wanted it usable as an obeyer on a daily basis, right? So we use the term obeyer. That comes from those who don't or haven't heard of it before. That's obviously the Japanese word around big room planning, came from the lean stable. It's where Safe bases some of their stuff off of. But we wanted it on a daily basis. So we do all this planning. We have this great collaborative board, and then in remoteness, we just disappear into remoteness. Well, that's not what we wanted. We wanted to be able to continue to work with people. So we all looked at each other and went, okay, we'll use the principles of virtual obeyer. So I'll just take a little side step, and I'm not here to advertise. I just want to make that plain, but I did want to focus on, Scott was talking about RAF. So RAF, my company, has been working on a remote agile framework, which is called RAF. And you can find that you can find that out on the web. I'm not going to talk much more about it than that, just to let you know that's where it came from. But one of those principles is a thing that we call virtual obeyer, and we've developed that as part of our remote AF framework. And so we thought, well, why don't we use that to underpin the solution and how we're going to do this? Like we know how to do big room planning, we know how to do the agile thing, but how do we add all that together? So thinking about that, talking about lag time, we decided to leverage off this. So this is the remote agile framework, and as I said, you can find this at remoteaf.co if you're so inclined to go and look at this at any stage later on. And within it, we look at the landscape of how you actually work in a remote fashion, right? And so we talk about enterprise, team of teams, and how we might connect all of those together. And you can see the dotted line that uses that to connect. And one of the things that we use to stitch that together And the one that we wanted to base our thoughts off of and how we were going to put this together was what we call the virtual obeyer. And let me just preface that. Myself and another guy made that name up. So if you're looking for it out there, it's not there. We just made it up. So, virtual obeyer. If we're going to do that, then we want to look at some of the principles of it, right? So everybody asked me, what's a virtual obeyer? So I'll just take a quick side journey into that for you. It's really what I call provides the collaborative connective tissues. And I call that collaborative connective tissues because, again, what I do with organizations is I'm trying to get them to work horizontally and vertically, right? They're able to connect their information flow. So at the heart of Agile, I don't know, my favorite heart of Agile persons are here, but for me, for one of the things at the heart of Agile is the ability to create information flow. And when you have information flow, you can make those directional decisions and it allows your organization to adapt quickly. I mean, that's at the heart of Agile, right? Inspect, adapt, make those directional decisions, allow you to steer. So what we want to do is provide something that helps provide that collaborative connective tissue. So we want them to collaborate, right? And while we're at it, it's a central information source where they can get that information very quickly and they can move and shape. So my description for it, oh, hello, something's happened. I'm sure you all saw that. Technology at its best. It's an information radiator. So I talk about it, it radiates information from the organization to the organization. And let's think about it, that's what a program board is, right? That's what it does. If we're doing it properly, we've got a big room planning board, that's what it does. It radiates information from to so they can make the decision. So that was the first principle that we were looking at to design the online system. It is early in the morning and I don't have whiskey like you guys, so I'll just have a drink. All right, so if we think about that, there are a few other principles that we put together. So that's what a virtual obeyer looks like for us. So that's our diagram of virtual obeyer. Again, you can find that out there on the web in the room I have. That's about the only place. But when we talk about our virtual obeyer, we talk about 4 different zones. So you can see we have the strategy, the work, the data, and the culture. So if we're going to create this thing, it's going to be long-lived, but it's still going to serve big room planning. How do we do that? And this is the thing that we came up with. So what's going to be in our strategy zone? So when we start talking through that, okay, let's start with this as our underpinning thing. What's going to be in the zone of this big room planning? How are we going to fashion it? And I know this seems a little sideways at the moment, but I will connect it back in a moment. So we talk about our strategy zone. We still need to, on the day, we still need to be able to actually connect our strategic intent to our delivery. We need to be able to connect that down to our teams. So we actually have that directional alignment. Everybody's, in the same direction of travel on the day, right? That's not new. But how do we do that virtually? And with this particular organization, we were using a lot of OKRs to help do that. So we wanted to be able to align everybody with that. We just restructured everybody because we'd been moving into this agile thing. So we wanted to make sure everybody knew what teams were what and who was who in the zoo, so to speak, and how it all connected. So we wanted to make sure we had all of those. And obviously we want to make sure that they understood the goal that they were trying to travel towards for the day. First thing. Second thing, we wanted a data zone. So when we talk about the data zone, we want to create that ability to aggregate the information, display it, consume it information dynamically, be that from your workflow systems like Jira, be that from dashboards, whatever that be. We want that relevant information on the board so people can, again, on a daily basis, look at that board, it's living, self-informing. So when we create these big room planning boards, I always talk to people about them. Are they self-informing? Does everybody understand it when, even in a physical sense, right? But when we move into digitality, that's going to become even more important. So what we're trying to do here, we're actually trying to evolve what we've been doing in a physical sense and move it to a virtual sense. Right? We're not just copying it because it won't work. Because some of the things that we do on a day-to-day basis just don't lend themselves to virtuality, right? Then we move to what we call the cultural zone. All the humanistic things that I talked about before, right? So, what goes in here? Do we have the ability to put a retrospective up there so everybody can see the retrospective? One of the things about retrospectives, I don't know, I'll throw the question out to you. It's a rhetorical one, obviously, because you've tapping away. But, who's been to one of those program increment retrospectives? Everybody pats himself on the back, they create a few actions, they stick them in a drawer, and we don't do anything with them, right? Cool. All right, well, let's put them where people can see them. Let's make sure that people have to look at it, and so that people actually start using. We also, part of this cultural zone, I mean, in terms of virtual day, we probably want more. But for this particular day, we're thinking, okay, how do we get confidence vote from people? This is not just a utilitarian thing where we're just going to say, this is going to happen, and now we've done it, and that's great, and let's march forth. We want the actual people to actually be part of this and say, yeah, we think we can deliver that plan, or no, we can't, right? The biggest question I always ask when we do these planning sessions is, okay, we've done this, now this is your chance. You tell me before we walk out of here, can we or can't we? Because if we can't, that's okay, and we'll go back to the plan. Cool. All right, so that moves us to the work zone, where the rubber hits the road. But we also wanted a representation for the day and ongoing, if you think about it, of the team's work. So we wanted to be able to give them the breakout rooms, right? And we wanted somewhere for them to put that and plan as the teams before they came back to doing it in the big room planning sense. And then we wanted the actual ability to be able to see it on a board, and we wanted that real time, if possible. And if possible, we also wanted that to connect back, right? So we could see all of those things. So we wanted to be able to see risks, issues, sequencing, dependencies, which should be no stranger to everyone here. But how do you do that, in virtual sense? So that's really the underpinning things that we put together, and using the virtual obeyer. I thought I'd stop for two reasons. I'm going to have a drink of water, and does anybody have any questions?
Yeah, we've kind of heard that at least one person's got a flashing screen. Has anyone else got that problem?
I promise it's not the light off my head.
No, Scott, don't believe so.
Right. If you can you swap to another device, Mr. C? Excellent. By the way, loving this, Tony. Absolutely loving it.
Has anyone got any burning questions?
Any burning questions? I just thought I'd give a moment, and I also thought I'd give myself a moment since really early. Okay, if there's no questions, I'll move on, because most of that's not rocket science, right? As I always say. Okay, so I thought, let's look at a real example. So this is actually the tool of choice that we chose when we sat down and thought about how we were going to do this, and we did have to talk to their security people. There are a few things. They're a Jira shop. We could have tried Jira, but Jira and virtuality is great if you just want to do certain things, but not in a big sense. There were a number of other things. They had Microsoft Teams and they had Blue Gene, but all these things only have little parts of the puzzle. So what we actually ended up creating was using Miro. And we had a whistle-stop conversation with their security people and got access to Miro. And so Miro is what we designed all of this in. And so this is actually the real board.
Tony, did you have to blank the data out immediately afterwards, or did security put any conditions on that?
They're still using it. So the answer is no. So again, what I want to impress upon you here is this wasn't a once-off tool. So when we spoke to them, we're saying going to be using this on a regular basis. Now I understand that a lot of security and Miro has had a bit of a past. It was real-time board originally, and it's been around the block, and people are asking the question about security and connecting to real source systems. So the one proviso that we did have here, unfortunately, which we're slowly addressing with them, is it didn't connect back to Jira dynamically. We had to do a lot of the work ourselves pre-day. So you can imagine there was a fair bit of frenetic work. We'll talk about that. Yeah, so we used Miro because we had the interactivity we wanted. Since then, as part of the remote AF, we've done a real scan of tools out there. So there are a number of tools that you can pull this off in. So I'm sure nobody's blithe to those. You can use Mural, you could use Miro. There's Lucid Charts is another one that's really good that I've been using with another organization, etc. So there are other things. This just happened to be our tool of choice on the day. So I'm in no way saying go use Miro, right? It'll depend on your organization. It'll depend on the security. It'll depend on the conversations that you have. But I guess it's more the process around it, right? One of the things I do like about this, and when we used it, I think when I was having the precursor talks with Sath and that, I said it's like, I'm showing my age group now, but if you're old enough to remember a game called Pong, the only game when I was young, right? It looks like Pong on acid when it's actually happening. All these little things are going backwards and forwards and up and down. So if you think about that, what I thought I might do is just zoom it in a little bit. So this is an actual representation. I've changed all of the data and the names to protect the innocent and protect myself, of course, yeah. But you can see the zones and you can see how we've designed it against the zones. And then what I thought I would do, so you're going to have to give me a minute while I play technology here and hope this works. I'm going to bring you into the real Miro board itself, because then I can zoom into the actual zones and give you a little look. And so what I'll do is I'll actually just give you a whistle stop through the zones, then we'll have a bit more of a chat, and then I'll actually use the board to show you how it worked on the day. And hopefully that works for everybody. If not, feel free to yell. You can't throw glasses at me because it's virtual. Okay, sorry. There we go.
Can't thank you enough for zooming, Tony. I don't know if I was the only one straining to see before, but of course you were going to. Thank you.
Yeah, that is one of the benefits of it too, is you can move it around and zoom and etc. So, all right, you can see this is our agenda zone, and if I give it, I won't zoom too much. I'll come back and zoom on it when we talk about how it worked on the day. But you can see we had our agenda over here. These natty little objects that we created. You can click on them and they take you to rooms. And then here is the org structure, and that was the first part of the day as you would progress through it. Then we had what we called the workspaces. So these are individually set up for each of the teams. So you can see we had 4 big teams working together. We had their OKRs. Now this is empty, this board, right? So if you look at the one that was back in the PowerPoint, and I'll flick back to that so you'll get more of a sense of it, because obviously I can't show you real-time data that people are using. But they're OKRs, so they all understood, you know, as first part of the day we walked through that, but they're OKRs, they've got their risks, and then you can see their backlog. You can see the ability to put, I left one there for you. I've left a story in there, epic in there, and then another epic from another team where you can see the link to the dependencies. Great. And instructions. So if we're not there, instructions. And that moves us on to zone 2, which is the program board. Looking a little bit bereft. Quite frankly, it probably looks like some programs I walk into occasionally. Everything's green, but then you drop it on the ground, it's red. And essentially, you can see here that each of the teams are represented in their streams, and they'll be able to do their planning as we would expect. And then we'll be able to have to talk about their dependencies. The product owners will be able to chat, all the good things that we would do in big room planning. And we will do that in real-time factor, right? Right. Then zone 3. As we said, we wanted to walk into that humanistic sort of thing as well. So what we have here is the program piece. We're around the program risks, because we want to put them up in lights. We want them to do something again. You know, how many programs do you go to? How many big room plannings do you create risks? And then everybody forgets about them, and then they wonder why it comes back to bite them. Okay, we want to make sure it's there. The second thing that we used is that confidence voting. So you can see our little tool here. At the time when we were using this, they moved on very quickly. Miro, they now have their own voting system. So they obviously saw people like us doing that, but we preferred to use a thing called Minty. And that was basically this little hash code, and people could flash on it, and they could go out and they could actually vote on their confidence score. And yes, that's a real one. I didn't make that up. So you can see there were a very high level of confidence in what they'd done for the day, which is really good. And then obviously you can see our big zone retro that we talked about before, so that it doesn't go away and actually it gets used every week. So that's a whistle stop through the actual board. And I'm just going to do that, and I'm going to bring it down a little bit. So sorry, there's nothing worse than someone clicking and carrying on while you're trying to watch, but anyway. So that's it there. So now I'm just going to flick back to the presentation, and you can see now, if you look at this board, it makes sense against that board. You can see the different zones. You can see the information's actually there. You can see all the dependencies, and you can see what we all know is that beautiful spaghetti diagram when you do a good big room planning. The interesting thing around it as well is if you've done big room plannings, the old string technique, the whole idea in the string is if you pull something off, everything falls. Well, the same here. If you move something, everything else moves, right? So it actually sorts to bring the virtuality into the physicality, hopefully. All right. So, all good to talk about that stuff. Let's take a little talk about preparation. So, I think I was talking with the guys in the green room again. Babs, you know, she's just been through one. She said she's got the scars. So, before I even talk about the preparation, my top tip is if you haven't done this in virtual, it's just the same as if you do it in physical. It's going to go wrong, right? But it's the preparation to be prepared for the wrongness is the best way that I can put it. So we talked about that, right? And if there's one thing I learned from working with many distributed teams in many different time zones is that you can't have enough pre-planning. And I know sometimes that goes a little bit against the grain of just in time for agilists. And we want to move, but the reality of this is there's a few of our little rules that we have to actually stretch or break when we move into the virtual environment. So what we did was, as we said, we had 7 days. So we virtually launched it with some lunch and learn sessions for everybody in all the different time zones. So you can imagine that was interesting. So especially the Kuala Lumpur ones and etc. We were staying back and doing it, but it was well worth it because we wanted to introduce them what to expect in a big room planning event. And we took them through the board as I'm taking you through today. And we took them through a simulation and the agenda and what we were expecting. And that was all staff. So we were making sure that all staff were very clear what was going to happen. Now, obviously, it doesn't all sink in, but at least in that way, it's not a surprise on the day. So setting deadlines for those logistical considerations, they're the things that get away from you. And then all of a sudden on the day, there's that, oh, bleep moment where you go, we haven't set this up, or we haven't set that up, right? If you've got this many people and you're in a virtual environment and they're sitting at home and etc., you can't afford to do that. Think about the dollar cost, right? Just to have these people, let alone that we've got, you know, the CIO and etc. on the day. So you want to make sure that you're ready to go. So invites, room bookings, getting anything to do with your virtual environment tested and run. We had a few hiccups, so make sure that's ready to go. Okay, this is an interesting one, but anybody who's going to actually do a speaking part. So, you know, on the day we had the CIO introduce the strategy and why I wanted to do it, right? We want to make sure that we have all of that ready to go and pre-planned, and we don't want anyone just rolling up and trying to free form it. We actually got them to run through it and make sure that they were very succinct, right? Again, in digitality, it's very tiring, as everybody knows. And the last thing you need is somebody just droning on. So we had to make sure they were very short, they're very sharp, they understood what their timing was, and we were actually metering that as facilitators and making sure the time was running well. Big thing for us was making sure that team level capacity and leave and demand were planned, because people forget that every time when they do big room planning, or any planning for that matter, right? So making sure that they actually have thought about that prior, because that's the one that sends everybody spinning off into the wall. And particularly because we just moved into a new environment, right? And we're just starting to work with Agile. And this first time, that's something they're probably not thinking about. Okay, you know, are all our people available in this period? Have we got holidays? All that sort of stuff. I'm sure I'm preaching converted, but you can imagine what we were dealing with. Cool. So then we move into this and go, okay, well, what else is there that we need to actually make sure that the day is going to work? So we needed to make sure that the vision, the roadmap, the objectives and the OKR sessions with the program leadership, make sure that they were already sharp, they were ready to go, and they understood how we were going to use them on the day and how they were going to work in the different zones. so that we actually, as we introduced those, they allowed us to decompose that strategy down, and it actually gave everybody their direction of travel. Right, so that's really super important that everybody's on the same plane, because we don't have time to have a disagreement about where our objective and key results going, or where our roadmap or our vision, where we got, a couple hundred odd people on a call, right? So thrash it out, get it done, make sure everybody's on the same plane. This is where we veer a little bit. Okay, so what I say to people is, when you move into this remote or distributed environment, sometimes you have to be a little more prescriptive than descriptive, is the way that I put it. And what I mean by that is, obviously we want it to be organic, and we want people to move and work together, and we want them to have their own thought and the knowledge of the crowd. However, we also can't afford for it to go left or go right. We want it to be going down the center track on a particular instance like this, when you've got everybody in this remote capability. So it's having a briefing with your scrum masters, your product owners, and your level leads. Make sure they are very clear on their role in the lead up on the day, post the planning. So they're making sure that we expect them to be facilitators as well. Make sure that we expect them to actually be helping us to do a little bit of the driving, not sitting in the back seat, especially when you've got new product owners. And our Scrum Masters hadn't done this particular type of event as well, and explain to them it's okay to be a little bit more directive than you normally would. Okay, so if you've got really experienced Scrum Masters, first thing they'll do is say to a team, well, what do you think, right? Well, in this instance, it's a little bit different. I talk about it like, a really great leader of mine once said, it's really easy to stick a flag in your own butt and say, in your people's butt, and say, go on, but it's not so easy to stick it in your own butt and say, come on, right? And just for your knowledge, he was a British tank commander, so he wasn't Australian. But the reality of it is follow me. Cool. So when all that came down, I think there was a couple of things that we really needed to think about. Was the tech prep. How were we going to do the conferencing breakout rooms, the voting, and the backup option? Oh, backup options. Apologies, started again. There we go. So how do we do that? So there's a couple of things we wanted to talk about. So I talked to you before that we didn't have availability of a Zoom or a video facilitator, or any of those ones that create great rooms. How do we conquer that? And I've come across this a couple of times, because a couple of organizations, that I've worked with have got WebEx or Skype for Business, so all the uglies. And the way that we came up with it was, and not rocket science again, but maybe this tip will help you. We created a main event, which went for the whole day, a room, a main booking in our Skype, and then we created multiple bookings for each part of the day, for each of the teams, for each of the rooms where we needed them to break out. Now on the Miro board, I will show you when we flip over to that again, we actually created little spots on the Miro board, hotspots, where they could click, and they knew that they were team one, they could click, and that would take them to the right meeting room. So that was just a little thing and it actually worked, which was great. But if that didn't work, we had plenty of people to help out with that. How are we going to do the voting? We talked about it. So we came up with that third-party app, Menti, so that we actually got that anonymous voting, because there's nothing worse than trying to get everybody on a Zoom conference to put their hand up and go yes, no, yes, thumbs up, great. There's 3 different pages. I don't know where you are. But the last one is the most important one for me. I learned this so hard when I was working with many distributor teams. What were our backup options? So I talked about before, something's going to go wrong. And most likely, it's going to be the technology. And we did have a few hiccups on that. Okay, so what are your backup options? So all we did was we put a board up and we went, okay, we're using Miro. What's going to happen if we can't use that? What happens if that falls over, etc. So we had an Excel sheet. Okay, I won't put it up here because it'll bore you to death, but we had an Excel sheet which replicated that as much as we possibly could. It would have been clunky, it would have been ugly, but it would have got us over the line. And you could do that with a myriad of different things, right? Second thing, what happens if our conferencing stuff goes AWOL? They did have access to other conferencing teams, etc. So we talked to their IT team, but we also then went, okay, how do we communicate in the background? We've got Slack and we've got Skype and etc. We had WhatsApp, so we created a WhatsApp for ourselves. And the reason that we did that is because we were going to separate and all go into different rooms and facilitate. So that's my other tip as your backup option. Make sure you've got lots of facilitators who know where you're going to go, because you're not going to be able to control this by yourself. And I can see Barbara nodding. I bet you she's had that pain, yeah, because I've made that mistake. So it's making sure you've got those people, and then having WhatsApp in the background was great for us, because we didn't have to worry about the corporate thing falling over or whatever, and we could just ping each other and go, are they finished? Are they ready? Can we call them back? Okay, time to come back to the main room. Yeah. If you've got an application like this, or you've got Video Facilitator, I don't know if you've ever come across that. It's probably one of the better ones I've ever used. It actually has a megaphone thing. You press on to everybody come back to the rooms. But it's just making sure that you corral everybody. So making sure we had the backup options. We had email prepared. We had text messages prepared. We had everything prepared so that if it fell over, and there were a couple of hiccups. So that's why I say to you, something will go wrong. Just be prepared. Okay. Oh yeah, I'm just recircle that to make sure you think about it. Okay, so how to run on the day. So what I'm going to do, I'm going to flip back to the board, I think is the way to go. So wait for my technological movement. So if we think about it on the day, I'll take you through a real whistle stop on the day, and I'm going to zoom a little bit closer than I did before. Hopefully that doesn't kill everybody. Can everybody see that all right? That's not too big on them. No one's yelled and screaming, so okay, great. So we started with the agenda, and you can see we actually have the agenda here and the agenda cards. If I could zoom just a little bit more, maybe like so, you can see the actual physical cards, yeah? And we could pick the cards up and move them across. What are we doing now? We had the time zone here, so everybody knew what the time zone was, because obviously we're using different time zones. And remember, we talked about the sessions. You can see the green dots: join team 1, join team 2, join team 3, join main session. So all they had to do was click on there. I think I may have deleted the actual hotspot while I was anonymizing stuff. Okay. So essentially what we had was our program leaders, and we had our CIO, and they talked through strategy here. We went through the OKRs, we went through all those things that we said that we were going to talk through, and that was the first part of the day. And we had a very clear agenda so everybody knew what was going on. And that was all done in the main room, making sure that everybody could hear. One of the good things is, you know, obviously being able to mute everybody and then unmute them. That's a big tip. Nobody should be strange to that, especially the guys who are organising this meetup. Otherwise, you get all sorts of strange stuff coming through. Can I make the point? We took a no apologies for interruptions approach to this. So I do that with all my meetings. And again, I'm probably preaching converted, but let's face it, we're in remote. A lot of these people, we were all thrown into remote. We weren't ready for it. Some people working on kitchen tables, or people, we had kids, we had dogs, we had all sorts of things wander through. And you just got to laugh and roll with those punches, but try and control that. But there's no apologies. It's going to happen, right? So just be aware of it, roll with the punches, and make people feel comfortable about it. Okay, so then we moved into team 2. So when it came to the breakout, everybody moved off into their rooms. And of course, obviously there was a lot of pre-planning done. As we said, we had the features ready to go. The product owners understood, could have that conversation with the team. You could talk about the capacity, make sure you connected the risks. We had the OKRs spoken about, so objectives versus the key results. And I'm not sure if you're all using this, but we use the objectives and key results to help them actually sharpen their goals. So their sprint goals should actually equate to the OKRs. Now, what we had done was we had drilled our executive team and our program team, and they were obviously going from room to room, either as asked or they were just floating through. And so, you know, one of the things that we were looking for there is obviously if you've got your objectives and your key results, that links to your goals. And if these guys are planning something and the goal doesn't link to the OKRs, then the question should be asked, and ask it early. you can see the ability to link to your dependencies. So dependencies were down in this zone. So we had all the teams doing that, right? Any questions? Things going to pop up that they don't know, we want answers to. So we used a question zone as well. And of course, risks. So that all went swimmingly, as you can imagine, but we got there. A lot of facilitation from myself and the other two, Reg and Paul, that we're working with. Really experienced principals, really great guys. Between the three of us, we got them where they needed to go. One of the saving lights for us is because we spent that time with the Scrum Masters and the product owners, so they were really understanding where they needed to go. As I said, I'm not going to go into all the dirty laundry, but things popped up and we had to work through those, and we were communicating backwards and forwards. We didn't allow enough time. It takes longer than you think it's going to take in the remote sense. So be prepared for that. Be prepared to allow a lot more time than you thought you should. So we got there in the end, and we called everyone back in, obviously, and we had some breaks, and we'll talk about that. And then it was time to bring it all to the big program board and start doing the program planning. And again, luckily, in this instance, we'd spent some time drilling everybody, because you can imagine once we start using the program board, and this is where it really does start looking like Pong on acid, yeah, and how we control this. So this is where everything starts to come together, and as everything's put on the board and all the dependencies are linked, that starts to become very interesting, especially when people want to talk to each other. And so we were talking to them about using their breakout rooms to actually have those chats. So product owner, I need to talk to you about that dependency. I need to talk to you about this, etc. And of course, we went through that during the day and built it and refined it. I'm not going to talk right through the process of big room planning. You'll know how that works, right? But this is how it came together. Now, this program board, I want to make the point, this program board is still alive. This Miro is still alive. They use it every single day. They don't use the planning zone, the team zone, because that's just on the day, and unfortunately it's not connected to Jira. But if you could connect that to Jira and get that working dynamically, that'd be awesome. Let me know how you do it, because I haven't been able to get it working synchronously. The program board is used every day. They're in remote. They use this as their obeyer. The CEO uses it, the CIO, they look on it. They have their scrum of scrums against that on a thrice weekly. This is used every single day. It's the lifeblood of what they do. So this is why we wanted to make sure that it was actually a reusable thing that we were creating, if that makes sense to everyone. Right. Obviously, we wanted to put up the program risks, and so we had a separate zone for them. Obviously, there was a lot more than that. So here's the other thing. Okay. Be prepared you didn't allow enough room on here. Okay. And be prepared to dynamically shift and move. So we actually expanded it a bit, moved it a bit, because you can do that, but it's just basically saying to everybody, hang on a moment while we open it up and create a size, because sometimes it's not so dynamic. The zones are locked so that they can't change the shape and size of the zones. Otherwise, you're going to have people, grabbing it, moving it all over the place, and then it's going to be a real nightmare and nobody knows what's going on. That's my other top tip to you. And then, of course, when it came down to the day, we wanted them to vote. And we wanted their confidence vote on, and how happy were they with the quarterly plan. And you can see we achieved about a 70% there. We had 15s and 10s and 5s. So then there was some conversations around that. And that's why we had the retrospective as well, because we also wanted to drag out anything that might not anyone be comfortable here in telling us. Although I have to say most people were very forthright about why they were not happy. And we took those on the chin and moved forward. And then our retrospective board. So you can see again, you can do this quite strongly. Now, as you can imagine, a lot of people, how do you do this? So we didn't do it all just on this one board, right? So I'm not going to say that. What we did again is use the breakout rooms. And we get them to do the breakout rooms, and then we actually get them to distill that down and then bring it back to the board. And as somebody's putting something up the board that's same as someone else's, delete it. So they're happy, cluster it, take out the actions and make sure we do something with it. So I'm hoping that that's useful. So we're really near the end of the presentation now. So So if I bring it back here, you can see again, this is how it looks on the day. You can see on the left-hand side, you can see we've been moving through the agenda. You can see, so this is actually in motion. I took this snapshot in motion. So you can see here, we're moving through the agenda. You can see we're actually doing this. You can see we've had one part where we brought it together on the board and it's looking very spaghetti, and we've started to move things around. I thought I would end before the questions, just give you a few tips from me. So things we learned on the day. Pre-planning. Don't be afraid to pre-plan more than you would ever pre-plan, and fight your agilistic instincts to do just in time. Pre-plan. Have good experienced facilitators for the rooms if you can. Don't try and do it all yourself or you'll burn yourself to the ground. It doesn't matter what technology you're using. It won't be perfect, so be prepared for that. It's just like any big room planning. I think the thing that I see people, now that I'm working with them a lot when they're doing the digital thing, they think because it's digital, they've got it all set out and it's nice and it's digital and we've got it planned and we have this schedule that it's going to run and work in that sense. And it's not the case. It's just like if you're doing a big room planning on a big room day, right? Make sure you have a way of communicating between yourself and the facilitators in the background so that you can sync up, depending on the application you're using, obviously, right? Don't be afraid to be that bit more prescriptive than descriptive, as I said, and don't be afraid to imbue that in the teams that you need a little bit more direction. Obviously, after you've done this a couple of times, you can take the lever off the prescriptive, but really you do need to be more prescriptive than descriptive here, because otherwise it'll just get out of control. Because we're in this whole remote sense, make sure that we're just constantly checking for understanding. Remember, again, it's about the humanistic thing, not the mechanistic thing here. We really want to make sure that people are involved in this. The other thing for me is for the rooms, make sure you've got your spokespersons for the rooms well drilled. So your SM, your Scrum Masters, your product owners, dare I say it, project managers, make sure that they have some understanding of what they need to do and that they're going to be the spokesperson in certain instances. Now, normally we know that when you do a retrospective, you like everybody to have a voice. But again, if you're extracting it from there and bringing it to a program sense, the time for the voice is here, and then they have a spokesperson who actually, for all the intents, because you can't have everybody talk up, you'd be there forever trying to get through a couple of hundred different people, right? And again, the last one that I can say is make sure you have a backup. Your technology will go wrong, something will go wrong. So if you spend a good amount of time just running through the scenarios, and what we did was we actually ran scenarios. What if that goes boom? What if that happens? And we ran through the agenda and just went, if that's going to fall over, how would we do that? Can we just use an Excel sheet? Yeah, we can do that. Clunky? Yeah, it'll get us there. All right, what if Skype doesn't work? Well, that's normal. Everybody's used to that. What do we do? So have those backups. That's really it from me. I'm hoping that was useful. Happy to take any questions, happy to talk through anything that anybody wants to talk about. I know I've been going 100 miles an hour and it is very early in the morning here, so I thought I did pretty well to be awake.
No, that was amazing. And I have to say, from a personal point of view, on the preparation to this talk, you had shared one of the elaborate articles about pivot into big room planning, which I referred to relentlessly on the run up to our remote planning last week. And we did so much of what you were talking about, of stress testing systems, making sure that, even just the basics, can we handle 150 people on a Skype call at once at the busiest time of the day? Like we tested everything and made sure we had a backup for everything. And it really got us through the day. And it took us longer than we expected as well.
That
actually had some knock-on problems, because we usually reserve 2 days, and we did a draft plan review on the first day, but then we extended to the third day and we didn't do a second draft plan review. So by the time we got to the final kind of objective settings, there was a lot of questions, and that session took a really long time.
Yeah. So the other tip that I've got it, look, I actually had it written down and I didn't say it, right? Was the one thing that we learned from that session unanimously from everyone, because I can tell you everybody had a hangover for the next 2 days, Literally, that's what people were saying. It felt like they had a hangover because we'd just been on screens all day. We did not schedule enough breaks. We didn't make, so, you know, since this has all happened, you know, I've been doing this quite intensively with lots of different people, obviously, and don't be afraid to put in lots of breaks because people need it. Even the facilitators need it. You'll find that, you know, we had a lunch break like we would normally have. We had a morning tea break, but people were still fairly, you know, you're on screens the whole time, and it actually, the focus of concentration was really making people tired. So by the end of the day, trying to hold people's attention became a real facilitation exercise. And so my thing with that is give people plenty of breaks.
Yeah, I was talking to Lizette yesterday, and she's been working with NASA, and NASA are saying a break every 45 minutes is what they, you know, with their research for screen times. And I know I'm working with some execs at the moment that are doing, you know, so many back-to-back meetings. I'm having to tell them to go to the toilet, or I'm worried they're going to get cystitis or something. You know, it's, you know, you can't sit for 9 hours, you know, back-to-back meetings with no breaks. But that seems to be what we're pushing ourselves to.
What I'd say too, also, if you've got, depends on the application you're using again, right? You know, Zoom does have that thing where you can raise your hand, but do you really see that as facilitators sometimes? Not so much. So I know Lisette, and one of the things that we used, not only here, but we've been using from Lisette is her cards. She's got these great cards, you know, and it's, I'm frozen, or you're frozen, or I want to speak now. And if you put that up on screen, it really catches people's eyes. And then so the bigger you're planning, use it.
Yeah.
Good idea.
So we've got a question coming out here. At the program board stage, how did the conversations happen using the breakout rooms? Were people joining rooms and finding someone else there? People struggling to find each other as they're away in a room talking to someone else, etc. Yeah.
So literally, I guess when you talk about big room planning, you obviously realize there's going to be certain pundits that everybody wants something of, right? So what we actually did was, and I probably didn't say this clearly, we assigned them rooms. You know, product owner 1 and product owner 2 will be available in that room because that's the room, their team that they came from. The people will be available. So if you want to talk dependencies or you want to talk how you're going to manage that, this is where it is. So again, it's that pre-planning thing. It's preparing them. They know where they're going to be. Because actually what happens, and it's a very good point, you made a really good point there, is if you let it float, so let's think about a normal day, right? You just walk between rooms, wouldn't you? Right? And it'd be easy enough, possibly, because hopefully you've got a big space or you're close by. You know, whistle, you know, Bob, come over here, we need you. We want to talk to you about this. That doesn't work, right? So again, so that prescriptive versus descriptive thing that I talk about is on the day, when we get into this mode, you need to be here. And if people want to talk to you, that's okay. We also gave them a particular timing there where they walked around. They did get the chance to float between rooms just as if they normally would, so they could pick up other things, pick up conversations, etc. as well. Hopefully that helps. Again, there's no perfect science to that. It's more art than science. And as they say, I don't know what art is, but I know what I like, and I know the things I didn't like on the day. So they're the things that'll help you.
Thank you.
And we've got another one from Maddie here saying, how much of the planning was done prior to the change to remote session? Were you able to recycle much of the existing prep?
Yeah, we were able to recycle a fair bit of the prep. Again, as I said with this, we did a lot more prep than we normally would. So we got them to do quite a bit of planning, and I can see Bab nodding because we did put that in our article about enough is not enough, I guess is the word. There we go. Yeah, right. So again, that's that agilistic instinct of wanting to do it on the day and having that just-in-time moment, which, you know, that's been my lifeblood. But the reality kicks in that when you move into this type of thing in this type of environment, how do we do that? And the best you can do is the best pre-planning you can do as much as you possibly can. And that's why I said to you, you know, when we moved them into those rooms, that things would go wrong or we didn't allow enough time. That's why, because we didn't allow enough time, because as they started to break it down and have a look at it, even though they'd done that, there were things they went, oh, that's not broken down enough. We didn't consider that. Look, you don't want to take away the aha moments. So you still need the spontaneity, but you try to do as much as you possibly can without crippling that human connective collaborative tissue that I talked about before, right? Getting them to connect horizontally and vertically is not easy at the best of times, but if we can get some of that information flow both up and across, then that's what we're looking for, right? I mean, let's face it, that's what we're trying to create on a big room planning day. Again, that's my hobby horse, is remember, focus on the humanistic versus the mechanistic.
Yeah, one thing I'm noticing is teams are getting much more siloed because they're working together in their kind of only in their team. They're not getting a sense of the larger organization. So these meetings are probably more important. Yeah,
correct. And that's that's why I sort of went off into the left side of the field there. I was talking about the remote agile framework and the Abaya, because for me, that's about how do you create, and anybody who's heard me talk or hear me talk about using the heart of agile, I am a heart of agile person, if you hadn't figured that out. And, for me, it's really about that. How do you get them to collaborate to create that information flow so you can create those directional decisions, right? You can reflect and improve on that piece. But in this sense, in what you're trying to do here is create those collaborative connective tissues that connect the silos both horizontally and then allow the information to flow vertically so that you can get that response to make those directional decisions either that way, or within the teams, if that makes sense. Because once you do that, once you create those collaborative connective tissues, then what you're doing is, and you're creating this culture of trust, because everybody understands it. They see that their point of view is being taken into account. They can see what's happening. And once you have that, then that starts to create that information flow. You make the directional decisions. You can start to actually look at what you can deliver more early than you normally would, and then you reflect back on that, right? You're going to have the data, so you can introspect on that and make the improvements. But I didn't come here to preach Heart of Agile to you. So.
We've got a great question from Stan here saying, which element of the process did you find the biggest challenge to perform remotely?
Which one didn't I? Okay. I think, look, I think that the two most challenging pieces of the day were when we had the breakout rooms and just making sure that they were focusing on getting things done, but thinking about the greater piece of the puzzle. To Scott's point of view is also, that's great, but have you thought about you're dependent on, because we didn't have that interconnectivity of everybody being in the same room, or the breakout rooms are close, and being able to grab people. So that was fairly challenging, heavy work. And I think when you bring them back and you start taking that and composing that up onto the big program board, that's a very intense piece again. And you need to be a little bit more, I know you keep using that word prescriptive, but you really need to be sort of like, for me, I felt like, if I can tell you the couple of times I've done this now, and having done this in the past, like I did one once where we had, 30 teams doing it with, like a 600 people sort of thing. And it was just chaos. The lesson I learned from that was, it was more like a training exercise where I became the trainer and I was saying, okay, we are going to do this now. Hands up, stop. We are going to do this, one person, etc. So that will happen. Fortunately, they were pretty well drilled, to be honest, and they were really good. And they're really good, really great company. They're really good people who really wanted to make it happen. It was a fantastic result. The leadership were really happy with it as well.
Awesome.
That answers the question.
We've got one from Scott Howard here saying, did they already use Miro, or was using Miro part of the training? So like the zooming in and ticket writing and stuff like that, were they already accustomed to that? Or was that something you had to think about on the run up to in the 7 days that you had? Yeah, no,
so that was part of the run up to it. So where we talked about the lunch and the learn and that type of thing, we introduced them to it. It's not a big learning curve though, luckily. Miro is quite good. The learning curve in Miro, and I'm not advertising Miro, because you can do this in Lucidcharts or any of those applications. So the learning curve was more about how you put it all together and get it working, to be honest. Showing people how to move the cards and how to create the cards wasn't so hard. We made sure that our Scrum Masters and our product owners really did know how to use it, so they could work with the people if they needed to as well. because obviously you can't be in 5 spots at once, etc. But we had a few hiccups. We had a few cards get dragged where they shouldn't and had to bring them back to home. Couple of moments where things got moved, but I think, again, that's going to happen. So no, Miro wasn't being used in the organisation, and B, yes, we did train them in it.
I've been doing some mural sessions with groups of new Scrum Masters, and the thing that I've found is if they don't have a mouse with a scroller wheel on it, then half the room seems to feel a bit inadequate at their zooming abilities.
Yeah.
So I've been trying to prescribe, please bring a mouse with a scroller wheel, but that doesn't always go down well for some laptop users. But
I'm not too bad at it now. I'm using a Mac, obviously. I'm a Mac boy, and so it sort of has that version of it. But yeah, I agree with you. Look, and as I said, I'm not promoting Miro as the be all end all tool. It's just the one I showed you today that we did that particular, and it was written in that article that Babs was talking about, that Reg wrote. This whole thing I'm talking about was that article, Babs. So literally, you could use anything. It doesn't matter. It's more about what you do on the day than the actual. You could replicate that. That's why we sort of looked at the remote obeyer that I showed you in the beginning and used that as the underpinning. What do we want to create? Then what tool have we got available that can satisfy that? Because I think what I've seen a lot of people do, in fact, I know because I've been working on a number of these, what a lot of people do is they go to the technology first. And then they go, okay, now how are we going to use the technology? Whereas I think it's better to go the other way and go, what are we, outcome over outputs, again, probably preaching the wrong crowd, but it's basically going, okay, what do I want to achieve? And then how am I going to achieve it with the tools? Don't go to the tools first.
Yeah, I think that's one of the approaches that we took too. We decided not to take on any new tooling at all, and that we would take what we learned from our first remote PI session, take it into next time, because we were like, whatever we've got, we'll do. And like you said, even if it's just an Excel spreadsheet to track dependencies, we'll do it that way, and then we'll figure out what we need afterwards.
Yeah. So I think that's a good way of doing it. I mean, there's a number of tools out there. I've looked at them. There's even what's it called? Remote PI is an actual tool made for safe increments. Seems to work okay. It's more about how you make it work on the day and what you're trying to achieve. The big thing for me is in this type of remote environment is, can it achieve the factor of being long-lived? Can they continue to use it? Because even when they come back, will they come back, right? We call that, and I'm sure you've heard that term, but it's going to be the next normal. How long before will we ever go back to the way we were? Will it be, people have had a taste of working at home. Corporations have had a taste of working at home, right? A lot of the times in fact, a lot of corporations wanted to do this a long time ago. But, OHS, all that type of stuff prohibited them from doing it. But now they can go, well, we've done it. Right. So how many are going to move back is the question. So for us, it was going, okay, how do we keep this in a way that we can use it ad infinitum, right? And if you do that and you move back into physicality and you've got a bit of both, I can give you my experience from a few years ago working with that financial organization. We invested in the real-time TVs. The big TVs, which are better now than they were then, where you could actually move things. And so some of our program boards were actually on wheels, right? And they were actually those great big things, and we'd move them across and we'd have, India and China and everything linked in so that we weren't trying to use a manual board at the same time. There's lots of different ways you could do it.
Yeah, I mean, we're thinking of things like this group. I mean, we used to meet in person. Yeah, so we were limited by the speakers we could get into Edinburgh, and even when we did remote talks, there was always something lost when the speaker was out of the room and everyone was in the room. So would we ever go back to physical meetings all the time? Bearing in mind that we've got people from all over the world here, patching into expertise from Australia. I mean, that's hugely valuable. And I don't have to kind of travel back afterwards on the train.
And you can have a pint.
So we've got a great question here from Richard saying, you haven't mentioned the Scrum Master breakouts. How did you ensure that all teams were tracking on the same on time and target?
Right. So with that, as I said, there were 3 of us. You heard me talk about the three coaches. So we floated between the rooms, but we were talking with the Scrum Masters on a regular backwards and forwards. So yeah, again, it's working with them. So making sure that you're running on time. We didn't run on time. I'm going to be honest, right? So that sense, I can paint you a really lovely picture here, and you can go away and go, oh, they were fantastic. But reality is we didn't run on time. And we had to allow more time, or we had to actually, you know, there was one instance where there was a bit going on and 2 of us had to come in the room to help get it going. That's okay. It's going to happen, right? As much time as you allow, you'll probably find you need more, right? Because things happen. Like, you know, a feature hasn't been broken down as much as you thought it should be, or it's got a lot more connotations, and you know, there's even discussion about one feature being taken out, or any of those types of things. And then, okay, if you take that feature out, that's cool for you, but have you thought about all of the cascade? So it really was just making sure that we kept communicating, keep checking in. No different to a physical day, but just a little bit more intensive, I thought. Did I answer the question? Are they happy? It's hard when you can't see people.
There's a belter of a question from Jim here. In general terms, without breaching any confidentiality, what were some of the top issues and ideas that came from the retrospective phase that would be useful for this audience?
Oh, good one. Good one. Yeah, okay. Some of them I can't tell you. All right. So firstly, one of the big ones was really around a lot more breaks. Yeah, that was resoundingly. If I could tell you how many were clustered in that thing, and even I'd written one, and I said yes, more breaks. I think the other one was more around them breaking their work down better for the day, which I don't think that's new to anything. So I'm not sure that's a great tip for you, but that is one of them. It was interesting because there was a lot of conversation around the actual tools, and I think one of the things was around how do we get Jira to work with that tool, because now we actually have to take the information from here and put it to there. I mean, I'm not a fan of Jira Agile, but I think if you know, don't let it run your process, but if you can interconnect and get that synchronous conversation backwards and forwards. There was a lot of conversation about, well, right, we've done all this, but now afterwards we've got to go and do this. And that was the other one that came out of it, was we didn't allow enough time for what we were going to do post. What was the post planning? And we should have really allowed that into the day a bit more, but you know, you live and you learn, and next time you do it, you go, okay, we need to leave a session there to say, okay, what are the post-planning activities? Who's going to be responsible for those post-planning? Who's going to put this stuff in Jira or Azure or Rally or whatever it might be, your flavor of thing? Who's going to do that if you can't get that interconnectivity? So they were the big ones. Which are all in all, the other ones were really more around the organisation. I can't really talk about those ones. Does that help?
Oh, and I think I missed one here from Mr. Howard again, saying, did you team charter mandatory video usage for the teams?
Sorry, did we mandatory video?
Yeah.
Oh, yes. Oh, okay, sorry. So I know what you mean. Exactly. Sorry. It took a minute. It is early in the morning here. The brain's waking up. So, yeah, so you mean turn their videos on so we could see them? Yeah. Yeah. We actually asked people to turn their videos on because there's a bit of a fine line you walk with that. So, because sometimes it can be a bandwidth issue as well for people. I'm sure everybody's had that fun. So if they do that, we at least get them to flick it on when they're talking. But yeah, as much as possible, videos on. Anyone who's been to a Heart of Agile coffee corner or anything when I'm there, one of the things I always do is say, hang on, at least for one moment, can we all have this on so we can all see each other? because you put a name to a face and all that sort of stuff. So I'm pretty high on trying to replicate at least being able to see. You lose enough sensory as it is, right? So let's try and make it as human as possible. Long-winded answer, but that's how I feel about it.
Good stuff. I think that covers the questions. Anyone else got any last-minute questions that they want to ask? Don't be shy. We're all friends here.
Because you don't have to get everyone physically together, the 2 days have to be consecutive. And I wonder what it would be like if you had a day in between, so it wasn't like the pressure of 2 days.
I think for me, you want the continuity. I think it much the same as in physicality. I think you want that continuity, even more so, I think, because, I think if you imagine that digital board and then coming back the next day and looking and going, where were we? I think you probably walk into a bit of a problem there. I'm not saying you couldn't do it. Obviously, you may need to at some stage, but if possible, if I was going to tackle it that way, though, I'd probably do 2 half days, not 2 full days.
Yeah. I think some of the where we're located with India and the UK, doing 2 mornings might be have been looked at because it's obviously better timing.
I guess the thing with that for me is you would have to allow a certain amount of time then to resync in the morning, because it's even in a physical sense, you get people who don't stop the water cooler conversations just to start with. Let everybody have that time to get it out of their system and have a chat about what they did the day before. I really encourage that in virtual sense, is trying to recreate that, but then resyncing and making sure everyone understood where they were from the day before. Yeah.
But we're missing out on the night out in the pub. Most of the work got done there in the night in between.
Best innovation comes from beer. If the problem is beer, the question is beer, so the answer is beer.
What was it Homer said? To the cause of and the solution of all our problems.
Would certainly help. Doing 2 half days would certainly help with the stamina issues.
Yeah.
Time, I suppose.
And the cognitive load, which is probably bigger now.
Yeah, I think you've got trade-offs, so I think you're going to have to make those decisions. I can't tell you the right or the wrong with that, and you're going to have to test that. But my intuition, having done, so we do training courses. So our training courses would normally be a 2-day, and we've split them into, 4 half days.
Yeah. Yeah.
But the thing that you have to do then is as you said, it's good for the cognitive load because people come back refreshed, but you have to allow that time for A, the water cooler conversation to let everybody get out of their system, and then B, you're really going to have to trade that off against the time to resync people back to where you were.
Yeah.
But against the cognitive load and the feeling of at the end of it, that's probably the fatigue. It's probably a good approach. Test it, I say. Let me know how it goes. I'd like to know.
One of the bits I loved about what you said was no apologies, because once during a presentation in front of 100 people, one of the product owner's dogs in the background kind of sneezed and barked at the same time, and afterwards he went, "Oh, excuse me," and everyone laughed as if he'd made the noise. So yeah, it's interruptions and animals and children will happen. So
look, it has to happen, and and I think we've all seen it. I had my own one here, which I'm happy to tell everyone, where I was in the middle of a conversation with a whole bunch of leaders, and my daughter came up, and normally, I just sort of put my hand out like, okay, I'm talking, but out of the corner of my eye, all I could see was blood, and I was just like, oh my God. And she came into shot, and all the leaders on there were going, just go and deal with, just go deal with that. Just for the course, it was just a tooth had fallen out. But, when I came back, there was a few people with white faces. So it was like, is she all right? So there's no apologies with that stuff. It's going to happen, people. Just allow for it and roll with the punches.
Well, I think this feels like a really good time to wrap up. So I just want to say a massive, massive thank you to Tony. That was fantastic. And thanks again for all the insight that you shared on the run up to this talk. It saved me immense amounts of arguments and work. So thank you for that. And a big round of applause for Tony. Well done. Thank you so much.
Tony, thank you very much. Fantastic.
Totally.
Hey, yeah, and look, don't feel afraid to reach out to me. You can find me on LinkedIn or whatever. I'd love to hear how your experiences and stuff, because that's the way we get better at this stuff.
Totally. Do we have any community shout outs for anyone who's left? Anything that you want to
part
give?
of Agile tomorrow night. They're doing some workshops on radical candor. So they had a session on radical candor with the radical candor people, and it was kind of like an overview. So this time it's much more driven in using the techniques, and sometimes you have to kind of use radical candor before you get the muscle memory to use it. So yeah, that's tomorrow night.
Good stuff. Awesome. And just a reminder that on Wednesday we have Red Team Thinking with Marcus Dimbleby. And the week after we have the Tyranny of Taylorism with Martin Hinsselwood. So we've got lots of exciting future events coming up as well. So hopefully you will all tune into those. So, and at that, thank you very much for everyone who came along, and have a great night. And for you, Tony, have a great day, because it's still breakfast.
Yeah. I'm about to go, get ready to go to work.
Thanks very much, guys, and we'll see you next week.
Enjoy. Real pleasure.
Thanks, folks.
Cheers.
And I will stop the recording.
Bob, did a good job.